I haven't always lived on a beach in Panama. There was a time when I was living in Port Orchard, Washington, and actually that was on a beach too. It was actually called Beach Drive, which was this beautiful rainy stretch along the St. Clair Inlet. And unfortunately, at the time, I couldn't really enjoy how beautiful it was because at the time I was living in this leaky, uninsulated fifth wheel RV, and it was the middle of winter. The RV was parked in the back half of this acre-sized property, well back from the main road. It was surrounded by trees with nothing visible on the sides, and there was just a great big cliff rock wall behind it. The property actually did have a water view at the front, but I was usually there in the evenings, and when I was there, that was just kind of this big black area, so there wasn't much to see. And the RV itself was parked right next door to a haunted house. Now, I don't know if you believe in haunted houses or not, but I think after a week spent in this place, you'd be second-guessing that. I mean, we had mysterious footprints show up. We had tools thrown across empty rooms. And you constantly felt while you were there that you were being watched. I mean, I even had government inspectors and contractors that I hired tell me that they felt the presence or they sensed that something very bad had happened there in the past. My wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, she wouldn't even go into the house by herself any time of day. Some further research did uncover that many big bad things did happen there. I'm not going to get into that today. But back in those days, I was working in Redmond, Washington. I was working at Microsoft. And I spent about 50 to 60 hours per week in this tiny little shared office there. And then I drove. It took me between 2 to 3 hours, depending on the ferry lineups, each way back and forth to Port Orchard. And then when I got there, I would spend a couple hours working on the haunted house, usually in the dark, before crawling into bed, wrapped in about as many blankets as I could find, to try to get a couple hours of sleep. In the morning, I dumped the buckets that I had sitting on all the furniture around the RV to catch the never-ending Pacific Northwest rainwater that dripped constantly through the roof. And then I'd go return to the haunted house, spend another hour or two more doing some work, and then I repeat the process all over and over again. At that time, in addition to working with Microsoft, I had a real estate investing and construction company that I was trying to build. So we used to buy and flip homes. At about that same time, I had read this International Living Letter, and I started to fantasize about this life down south, where the sun shone in my face every day instead of that constant dreary cold of the Seattle area. That international living was all, it was all about retirement, but it got me started to think about and start checking out hot real estate markets in the rest of the world, someplace that I could take my company, my construction company, and move to. I had this goal of dumping that haunted house, getting it out of my hair, and starting another real estate investment and construction company, somewhere other than Seattle. Unfortunately, at that time, the universe had other plans for me. This was back in around 2007 and then 2008, and the great real estate crash devastated my entire investment overnight, along with my credit rating and all of my savings. My plans were completely shattered. And I started to have these visions of working at a corporate job that I absolutely hated by this point, probably living in that fifth wheel in some backwoods rat hole for the rest of my life. But I do remember vividly the book I was reading at the time. And I even remember it, sitting in the kitchen of the RV and moving it farther away because I had a bucket in the middle of the table from one of the leaks. And I'd move it out of the way so the rain would hit it and get it wet. The book was The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. And, here I was, I was working 60 to 80 per week at a job that I hated. Then I was commuting another 25 hours a week through traffic. And here was some young kid who was telling me that I could live on a 4-hour work week. Now, I didn't believe it for a second. I thought it was all crap. But you can believe that I did dive into that book with everything that I had. I read it every waking hour that I could find. Mostly, I think, looking for some fault where I could prove that Tim Ferriss was wrong, and it just wasn't possible because I was pissed in my life at that point. But I started researching how the new rich could live on much less, but enjoy things like the benefits of a maid and cheap food and a low cost of living. I started to devour everything I could find about living abroad and online businesses. Back in those days, the terms digital nomad and location independence barely existed at all. But the 4-hour work week started me on that journey, which ultimately led me to where I'm living now in a beautiful condo on an unspoiled stretch of beach in Panama. And I will be forever grateful to that book to do that. I need to tell you a little side story. Tim Ferriss, apparently he travels to Panama often to dive. And I actually ran into him in a coffee shop in my neighborhood one day. Now, being the extreme introvert that I am, it didn't actually dawn on me to actually go and introduce myself. So I just took a second glance when I realized and recognized who he was, and then I left. Now that I will always see as an opportunity lost for me. And that's something that I never, ever want to have happen to you. I don't want an opportunity to be lost. So ask yourself, what are you willing to do and learn in order to make your dreams of a location-independent life come true? And what will you do so you don't miss the opportunity at a full life without borders?